Okay, the recording has started. Give everybody a chance to connect.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us in this series of webinars. Today's topic is The Journey Continues, Enterprise Software Implementations. So the topic that we're going to talk about and deep dive in is understanding both the vendor and the client responsibilities when implementing a new piece of software. In this case, we're talking about warehouse management systems. At the bottom, the information discussed in this session represents the views of the individuals, does not constitute legal advice or the views of Alpine. You should consult with your organization's leadership and legal counsel as needed for your specific situations. So again, thanks for joining us. I'd like to introduce myself. I'll be the moderator today. My name is Greg Utter. I'm one of the senior managing directors at Alpine Supply Chain Solutions. Within the organization, I run our systems practice, which is all things software related. And again, in this case, it's WMS Warehouse Management Solutions. Joining us today, Dave Fredericks. He's one of the managing directors within Alpine. Dave plays a critical role in our client-side responsibilities team, where he helps customers implement and deploy software in various industries, and he was instrumental in this adventure with one of our partners, Raymour and Flanigan. Chris Hatch is trying to dial in. We'll get him dialed in as soon as we can, but Chris is the Director of Business Solutions for Raymour and Flanigan and played a very key role in the overall implementation of the warehouse management software at R&F.
Okay. So thank you, Greg, for the introduction. Yes, the name of this is The Journey Continues, Enterprise Software Implementations. About 2 months ago, a colleague of mine started the journey with a webinar about software selection. So I'm going to continue that journey and talk about enterprise software implementations. And as Greg said, we're going to focus on WMS because that usually is the more, other than ERP, that could be the most complex software you're going to have in your company. We're going to look at the implementation overview. We're going to look at responsibilities and expectations. We're going to talk about integrations. We're going to talk a lot about integrations. We're going to look at configuration overload. A lot of the software now is very configurable. We'll talk process documentation, testing, training, and go-live support. An implementation overview, the software selection has happened. Then we have a lot of activities that have to go on from, starting in the upper left corner, design and adapt. We need facility prep to go along with that. From the naming conventions to where my door is going to be, where are my inbound, outbound doors. We'll get into documentation needs. We get into testing. And testing requires a lot of data support. From testing, we move on to training, to go live, to post go live support. And if you're putting up follow-on buildings, then we got to repeat the whole process again. As we get into that, we'll probably not have to do as much testing. It depends on the configuration changes. But these tasks, these are all a mix of vendor-client responsibilities. And we need to find out early in this process who owns what. Vendors can provide a task listing or a RACI, responsibility, accountable, consultant, and inform grid of all the steps needed for the phases. We need to identify the gap between what services the vendor provides and what is required for a successful go-live. This will be the client-side responsibilities. Another key question to ask early on is who is documenting the business requirements and what does that document look like? I've seen a lot of different, a couple different software companies use process maps. other use Word documents. At the end of the day, you need to make certain that everything you talk about that you are requiring for this software to do for you is documented, so we have something to go back for. And as you see later, that'll become key in our testing.
So Dave, that's a great point. So talk to me a little bit about this process of the design, right? How does that work with the client, the customer, the vendor, and a group or a party such as Alpine? Walk us through why that's such a critical step and what you do when you run across something that isn't quite base, but it's something that we know the customer needs.
Okay. Thanks, Greg. First of all, you're going to have some workshops that go through all of your components, and I'll define components as, you know, as inbound, as outbound, inventory control, maybe VAS if you have it, and whatever areas you have, any kitting, any pick to light, whatever type of processes you have. The workshop is going to be, what are your requirements and what is the out of the box system prepared? So you need to understand your side very well, have the people in there that can talk about, well, this is what happens, this is what happens. Having a party like Alpine in there also, from their experience of many different types of clients, is asking the questions that in this, you don't know the system you're getting into, you might not know what questions to ask. We can ask those questions and we can call out, you know, we will be the intermediary, and, you know, we'll be the one holding task, both sides to task. So that is the most important part, to get it on paper, because once you sign off on that, that's what you're paying for, that's what you're getting. So make certain you do it right at that point. Once you get this gap between what the vendor provides and what you believe is required for a successful go live, you need to figure out, you know, do you have the experience, the talent, and the time in your organization to commit to these steps? Or should you contract some or all of it out? Knowing this prior to making the software selection is going to give you a better idea, the total estimate of that true implementation cost. If you go through and decide on a software and find out that you have to come to the table with a lot of heavy lifting, you might not have budgeted that correctly. That's an important step.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, David. One thing that we've seen, and there's no fault to the WMS vendors who are out there, but that's usually not a topic that they talk about during the sales cycle, right? During the sales cycle, they're talking about feature functions, how good the company is, what kind of expected ROI you can get, but they really don't get into a lot of conversations about what the client expectations should be once they sign on the dotted line. And we all know that, you know, everybody within that distribution environment already has a full-time job, 40 hours a week plus. Implementing a solution like this is another full-time job. And I haven't met anybody yet that can do two full-time jobs and do them both well. So better to find out early and, like Dave said, incorporate it into your spend so it's accounted for and you're getting the true dollar estimate for the implementation.
Right. Thanks, Ray. So once we get our design set and we start, you know, they're starting to work on the configuration part of it, integrations are going to be a key point early on. This is a very simple integrations map. You have your WMS up in the corner, left corner. You could have an order management system out there. You could have a TMS, YMS, ready last mile delivery. You could have warehouse control system. Most likely, larger companies are going to talk to a middleware, and then the middleware talks to the ERP. That middleware may or may not be there, but by the end of the day, it doesn't matter if it's there. All of those red arrows that you see, those are the critical steps that information is going to pass back and forth. It is truly, truly important that you understand all of those areas and really know what you need to do to get through it. First of all, there's got to be mapping to the vendor supply tables. They're going to want information in a certain way. They have certain field restrictions. Is it alpha? Is it numeric? What about duplicates? Are there any update rules? Do we make a change to an order? When can that flow? When doesn't that flow? What are the data flow triggers, timing and acknowledgements? Is there any failure exception logging? I sent 1,000 records down, only 999 got received. Do I know that right away? Or do I have to find out in some variance report 3 or 4 days down the road? And test the environment capabilities, volume testing. You know, I'm going to test, it's going to be, you know, testing. You usually don't do a lot of records at once, but I'm going to have to run some through. How am I going to, you know, if I'm doing 10,000 orders a day, how do I get 10,000 orders through my test system? Just, you know, take the time, do not understand the inherent difficulties in this step.
Yeah, one of the things that we run into very commonly is when we're trying to decide what a metric of success is and what goals we're setting in order to declare this to be a success. One of the things that you think about and you talk about said, well, if I receive and I ship to my customers, then that's a success. But what you really need to do is take a deeper look and say, that is true. I did receive and I did ship to my customers, but it took 8 seconds for my RF device to respond when I was doing a put away. That is not acceptable. So looking at those capabilities and volume testing, that is really where you find out what the latency looks like within your network. And you can't find that out by testing very small order pools, very small delivery pools, very small PO pools. So you've got to expand that volume to see what it's going to look like when it's under load.
Absolutely. So we talked about configurations. A lot, you know, back in the day, you know, software packages came, you took them out of the box, you plugged them in, and you adapted your business to the software. Pendulum swung really almost to totally opposite side. It is so configurable. There's a good quote out there. The good news is that it is highly configurable. The bad news is that it's highly configurable. What that means is, you know, even though many software vendors can handle your business requirements with configuration settings, which reduce the need for the dreaded customizations, there are so many, there's thousands of switches that have to be made to make the configuration work. What if I missed 1 or 2 of them? What's going to happen? Keeping the configurations consistent between development, test, and production environments, and even with multiple warehouses, can be very daunting. Now I come back to our business requirements. Our testing needs to be designed to confirm alignment with requirements. So we all agreed on how it's supposed to work. The configurations were done. How do we make certain those configurations, you know, give us what we'd asked for?
So Dave, talk to us about happy path versus non-happy path when it comes to testing.
Sure. We'll definitely get into it a little bit later, but you know, happy path, you need to make certain that I used to say the plumbing works. When I receive a PO, yes, the PO gets received. I saw it come down. I saw it go back. I saw it update inventory, both in the ERP and WMS. Great, but then I need to branch out into the not so happy path, all the variances. So we'll get into the testing, you know, but happy path makes certain it works, but then you need to try to break the system. I think that's where you're going, correct, Greg? So,
Dave, Greg, can you hear me?
yes.
Oh,
you're right.
hi. So, yeah, I'm really sorry. Had some issues here.
Okay, Chris. No worries.
Yeah, thank you for having me. If I could just say one thing that I learned is there are multiple happy paths. So, you know, for example, within orders, there's a lot of different qualifiers, different variances, and they're all right. So when we think happy path, originally, I thought as a new user, happy path was, you know, start it at one place and then to, you know, take it to that end. But really, when you're thinking about all the different type of orders you have and all the different, you know, trucks and, you know, whatever your business does, there's multiple places to start. So, you know, looking back, wish I had a lot more variety to our, you know, quote unquote happy path.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Thank you. So, process documentation. if the vendor can provide you documentation, and a lot say they can, it most likely will not contain any of your specific configurations or customizations. That's on the client. For a quality product and good training documentation, you're going to need work instructions, a how-to map through all of the different screens, process maps, really how is the whole business flowing in the new software, a failure modes effect analysis. What, if you've never heard of that, an FMEA is basically, it's a risk analysis. I can look at the process map, interrogate every step on that process. What could go wrong on the step? What many things could go wrong in each step? What are the causes of those? What's the possible effect? Do I have any controls in place? And really, what is the risk if it does happen? What's the severity? What's the detectability and the occurrence rate? All of those will give you a risk priority number. When you're done with this map, then you can say, okay, here's everything I need to look at. I have a priority on it, and I can start fixing it based on priority. Knowing what I have to fix, knowing what controls I have to put in place will lead right into developing your standard operating procedures. Work instructions, how to use the software, how to go from screen to screen to screen, standard operating procedures, what do I do when something goes wrong? Having that documentation preps you for training, preps you for the testing.
So Chris, talk to us a little bit about the importance of the SOPs and work instructions when things don't go quite as expected, because there's really no such thing as a flawless implementation. There's always going to be bumps in the road. But what's your experience with deviating from those proven work instructions and SOPs?
Well, you always want to tie back into the SOPs. Bringing out a new system, depending on the number of people you have, there's plenty of ways to make mistakes, right? So coming back to SOPs when they're proper, it's always a good way to bring them back to home base, so to speak, and get them on firm footing. So the SOP is super important. I would suggest making sure that they're printed out ahead of time, available for the associates, available for the leadership, and then maybe even taking it a step further, instead of just SOPs, over the first couple of days, finding out your frequently asked questions and making some troubleshooting sheets for those as well. Because the worst thing you want to do is, a couple of weeks in, again, answering the same questions when, look, the first couple of associates kind of guided that path for you, right? These are common mistakes, and to be able to provide some documentation, allowing people to figure it out for themselves, solve their own problems, it's empowering.
And we also
Great idea. FAQs.
Yeah, and we also took some of the standard operating procedures and created on the really high points a 1-point lesson, a 1-piece paper, laminate, put on front of the station. That help. Here's something that's going to happen every day. After a while, you're not going to have to refer to it. You'll know it by heart. So. Right.
I mean, Dave, you created those for us, having them on one sheet, condensed, super easy. And I know that it was appreciated.
That's good. So Greg kind of got into testing a few minutes back. Now, there are 4 basic testing phases. Each software vendor will call something a little different. In my mind, I've done these enough times that this is the 4 basic ones. Usually unit testing, which is, does it work? I don't care if it works with anything else. Does it work by itself? This is usually the vendor's responsibility. Find this out early on. I've seen some software vendors that they tell you how to do it and they stand back and let you do it. If you didn't plan on that, you have a resource issue and quite an emergent area. But unit testing is usually we're talking about inbound, that the inbound process works within the software. We then get into system integration testing, or SIT. That says, okay, does inbound talk to the ERP? If I get orders flowing from ERP down to the WMS, do they come down, all of them, with all the detail, with all the header information I need? And when I process my receiving, even receiving and over short damages, what have you, that all of that goes back and gets accounted correct on the ERP. That needs to happen with every component. Once you get through that, then you string all your components together and get into more of a user acceptance testing. I want to go through a day in the life of. I want to do my receivings, my putaways, my replenishments, my picking. I want to have people doing all of these at the same time. If your building runs 24 hours a day, then how do we make certain that we can account for all of those different operations? If I'm doing receiving, shipping all in the same 8 hour, well, then I need to be doing that all in the same time frame in my testing. Once we get through that and the client is satisfied that, yes, this is doing what I need, we start our readiness testing. We might do a big stress test during that. But basically, as we're getting production ready, it's going to be, we're going to have a code freeze. We're not going to make any changes. If we have to make changes, those changes need to be tested. Errors that are found late in the process need to be classified as a showstopper, unless there is agreement that a workaround and process can be utilized. If you can't fix it by the time of go live, and that's a showstopper, you're going to have a real problem if you go forward. So those are really the critical parts of the testing layout. Subject matter experts, when we get into the training.
Hey, Dave, I got a question for you guys on the previous slide. So I want to make sure I understand the difference between unit testing and system integration testing. To me, unit testing is I'm going to test receiving, and then I'm going to test picking, and then I'm going to test cycle count. But SIT is really that end-to-end string, right? So tell us the importance of making sure that you've got that from beginning through end, cradle to grave test scripts without chunking it up into smaller pieces.
You're right. Yeah, chunking unit testing is in small pieces. As I said, most software vendors do that themselves. They're not even going to turn it over to you for SIT until they know it works. Once you get into SIT, at that point, I'm going to do a happy path, but I'm also going to start doing some, how do I break the system? I'm requiring on integrations to come down. What happens if they don't? If we're in a real life situation and I'm not getting all the purchase orders, I'm missing some of the details, what are we going to do? So we need to make certain we throw, and this is where Chris got earlier, talked about it, all the different scenarios. What can we be looking at? What's going to happen? What happens every Thursday at 4 o'clock that we forgot about? You laugh, I know, but so you need to understand that, because we need to replicate that in test. We don't want to replicate that first time. We don't want to see that the first time in production.
And Greg, from a first time user, some of this might sound redundant if you haven't lived it. 4 different steps for 4 different testing, but it really did allow us to break down and find the root cause a lot faster in the long run. So when you do your unit testing, you're looking within the 4 walls of the WMS, and then you go on to SIT, so your integrations, and if it worked within the 4 walls, now you know where to look if it doesn't work with the integrations. I think if you try and throw it all together, you spin your tires quite a bit if you run into a problem.
Right, and if you want to look at from you're going to find errors. There's no software that's going to come out without errors. You're going to find errors 6 months, 7 months, 8 months down the road, whether it be in your ERP or in the software. That's just the way it happens. But you're in the unit testing, it's the software vendor that's making the fixes. Their involvement, if you're doing a good job and doing your due diligence, they should not be fixing much in SIT. That should be pretty much locked solid. Now you're working with your own IT folks to get that done. And you're going to go back every now and then because, we can't accept this data like that, software vendor, you're going to have to change it. You'll find that, but the actual system errors will be more ERP than software vendor as you go through the process. Just before we get into the training, subject matter experts to help drive the project, and Chris, I'm going to let you talk about it in a second. If you develop a cross-functional team early on who are really committed to the project, and let them do the testing, you're going to be light years ahead when you get to the training. You have a team, that incredibly talented team that you pulled from different areas of the operation, I don't think you'd have gotten where you got without them. So talk about that process.
Oh, well, thanks for that. Yeah, it was really important to us to make sure that, and I was on the phone, I just couldn't talk earlier. You talked a little bit about, making sure you have dedicated resources, because you can't have two full-time jobs. We were committed to it right away. Put together what we call the business solutions team, where we actually took, high performing managers, directors, and supervisors out of their position and committed to this one job. We didn't want them trying to fill in the few hours of their day to try and help us with this project, or vice versa, help their operation. They were committed. Altogether, I think there were 6 of us, including my boss, with almost 90 years of experience just with Raymour and Flanigan. And every person on my team, they worked in multiple positions in multiple departments. We wanted to make sure we had that experience and how all the different departments tied into one another. So they were committed, they were experienced, and then, they had the credibility when they're experienced. They've worked in all these different fields. So as we're rolling out now, we can always go back to that. And, we walked a mile in your shoes. We took all that into consideration, and here's where we are. And then I know you brought up also on your previous slide talent, and we took that into consideration as well. Talent for training, good communicators, and organized. Is going through this testing process, you have to be on your game. There's no easy day.
Right. And just to temper this a little bit, you have a good team. It's, you have numerous people on it, but you also have 20 some odd buildings that you have to roll out to. If you only have 1 or 2 buildings, you might not want to take 4 or 5 people out of the operation to do 1 or 2 buildings. So figure out how many you need. If you're just doing 1 building, it might be 4 hours a day out of your day job. You might be working 12 instead of 8. So, but the point is, dedicate somebody for, if it's full-time for a lot of buildings, if it's half-time for less number of buildings, you just can't have different people coming through the door to help out. It's got to be dedicated staff.
It's a good context, Dave. Thank you. Sorry about that.
No problem. Trainers, getting the leadership team on board and up to speed. They need to see it before training starts. You don't hear, but there's your step between a rock and a hard place here. You don't want them too early in the process, so they see all the errors that you're finding and fixing. That bad news will spread like wildfire. So when you're stable in the testing, start bringing them in, showing them the system. We had that. We saw that in your building, Chris. So the training plan.
I mean, not much to add there. You nailed it.
Training plan and execution. We need documentation for the different audience types. We're going to have the hourly warehouse folks. We're going to have the supervisors, the managers, directors. We might even have some VPs and senior leadership that we need to have. We're not going to use the same type of training tools for each one. You want to look at classroom training, floor time, shadowing. What's your medium to do? They all have their benefits. They all have the pitfalls. Classroom, you don't get the hands-on, scan the aisle, scan whatever you have to need. But at floor time, once it sounds really good to do a lot of that until you try to start choreographing all the data points that you're going to need to make it successful, and people aren't sitting around scratching their head waiting for you to do some, get the data ready again. You need to make certain, because you're working in a test environment, you go out on the floor, that's a live environment. So the inventory is always changing. What you have for orders in test environment is probably a week old. So having that, making sure it's in the right spot is tough. And then the timing, very similar to bringing the leadership in, the timing of the training, hourly training, not too soon, not too late. You do it too soon and they'll and then go away from it a bit, they're going to forget. If you do it too late, they're not ready. So training is critical, and just plan it out, get a training plan ahead of time so everybody knows what's expected of them, and you can have your training classes very successful. As you approach the end of the training, you're starting to think about go live. We need a go live readiness plan. Have some go no-go meetings. schedule it milestones. I usually schedule one after SIT, one after UAT, and then one after training when we're ready to go the week before. Each one of those, you're going to go through, am I ready to move on? And make certain people are comfortable saying no. And allow them to say no. If the majority rules or the owner rules, they say yes, we're going, then we need to figure out how we're going to get there and support it to get there. Have a go live checklist. This will help you get there. The building readiness, staff readiness, testing completion, training completion, very important. Program fees after the UAT. Any changes after UAT need testing again. Don't forget that.
I think the point on that checklist, it's not a checklist that you just kind of skim over. Those should be check boxes, right? Don't go past building readiness if it's not ready. Don't go past staff readiness if they're not ready, which leads into, that go live, no go meeting. We always want to go, but let's be pragmatic and make the decision the right way.
Mm-hmm. And you're right. And that checklist should have names and dates and people held accountable for them. Go ahead, Chris.
Oh, and it's after go live. We don't just put that away. I don't think. If we go live, take a few minutes to go back to that checklist, add some comments of things that happened, especially if you're doing multiple sites, so that it's always like a fresh lesson learned. You're always going to want to do a lesson learned at the end anyway. And it's much easier if you have real-time notes that you added along the way, rather than thinking back 1 or 2 weeks to come up with, what you remembered. So a lot's happening. So it's an active sheet.
There is a lot happening. All right, so now we're go live, cutover plan, game day. Choosing the go live date and time, really, really important. We need to develop a task list that leads up to that cutover. An operational freeze. We just can't flip a switch. We're gonna need a couple hours, few hours. I've seen as little as 2. I've seen as much as 10. That the software vendor is going to need to get that system up and running to go. How long can your operations freeze? Developing a contingency plan. What if it doesn't work? What are the workarounds to move forward? When and how to roll back to the old software. Hopefully you never get there, but one never knows. If you've done your due diligence and testing and not taken any shortcuts there, most likely the contingency plan is just going to collect dust, which is what you want. Developing an escalation plan. This is really important. You got to do this early on. When software problems arise after go live, I use a 3-level approach. Level 1, SMEs determine whether it's system versus lack of execution. If it's lack of execution, get back out there, retrain, take care of it. If it's a system, then take that up to the system administrator that works for the client. They can resolve and escalate. In some software, they're allowed to get in and configure. Other software, they're the ones that are going to be working with the software vendor help desk. So depending on what vendor you have and how much you're allowed to go in and make some changes, you're probably going to be the ones you can't make changes. You'll be going to the software vendor help desk. And also then when the change is made, pushing it back down to SMEs. Okay, it's changed. Go test it, and then we can roll it out.
So how do you pick a go live date, right? I mean, is it just a date on a calendar, or I've heard you set a date and then work backwards to see if it's achievable, but what are some of the things, Chris, that you guys debated about on checking that box on the go live date?
Well, I don't think I was involved too much on picking the go live date, which was 100% fine. But as we're looking into our future sites now, we have an end date in mind, and we're backing into that. We kind of have a sense now of what we can expect from a site 2, and it would, again, as we develop a cadence, we'll get better as we go along as well, and things should, speed up a little bit. But that's how we're approaching our next go lives.
Yeah, and I think that's the next slide, the follow-on sites.
Yeah, but just to Chris's point, to add on to that, where is the lull? A lot of people say, "Oh, we're going to go live on Sunday." Well, Saturdays and Sunday are my busiest days. I can't do that. You know, Tuesday, great day. I don't have any business. Like I can, I can move shifts around. I can get people out. I can give you 6 hours on Tuesday. I can give you 1 hour on Sunday. You pick. So look, it doesn't have to be a specific day. Look for that lull where I have time. And the worst thing with the iPad operations people, I had like 50 operations pickers ready to go right behind me. You're getting nervous because the clock's ticking on them, and I got to get moving. So don't get yourself into that situation.
Hey, Dave, I actually have one thing on this slide as well when it came to the contingency plan.
Yep.
Just a good call out because it is kind of thought of kind of toward the back end of things. But when you can, and if at all possible, test the contingency plan. It's just something you think happy path, and then you say, okay, I use all the different scenarios. This is just like any other thing that you want to do. So take the time, test it out if possible, and might get some gains for you.
Thank you. That's a good point. So on go live day, what's the vendor support plan? Are they on site? When do we turn over to the help desk? Some people call that stabilization period. Are they giving you 2 weeks, 3 weeks? When you're going to be working with a software architect, solutions architect, but all of a sudden they're going to go on to another project. You're going to have to go to the help desk. When is that day? Better know that before it comes. SME support plan. Do we have coverage for all shifts and departments? How many hours do we, how many people do we have to support? How many hours do we have to support? Greg kind of hit on this earlier, key metrics control plan. We got into this whole software, purchasing and implementation because we wanted to make some improvements somewhere, whether they be productivity, whether it be expense reduction, what were they, and how much were we supposed to get, and by when. You're not going to get it the first day. It might take you, some depending on the complexity, it might take you a month, 2 months, 3 months to start seeing those improvements. So laying out a flight plan of where I want to see those improvements, when do I get excited when we're not making it? And when we're not making it, who's responsible for fixing? Having that laid out ahead of time, we don't have to, we know there's a plan in place. Lessons learned, especially if you have multiple buildings you're going to do. Document, a group discussion of what worked and what needs improvement. And everything is on the table here. There's no hard feelings. What didn't work? We need to understand really what happened so we don't let it happen again. Follow on sites. What site went first? Why? What site's going second? Will some sites require additional configuration? If so, how are we going to control that? Is there a gap analysis for additional configuration and existing testing and training documentation? If there is, we need to address it so we can get it fixed. Can I utilize the first site plans? Great. If I can't, I got to get them changed. Can I utilize the previous site to train future sites? If they're nearby, fine. If they're on the other side of the country, that's probably not going to help. What's my plan? I need to align with the vendors on the time between sites. Are they capable of meeting that rollout plan?
So Chris, I know you guys did a really good job of training the forward DCs to be the next DC and the previous DCs to be the Talk to us about how important that was to find those individuals for the future sites to roll them into the go lives of the previous sites to make sure they were trained up.
Oh, well, I think we're really just starting that process now. We have a good plan for it. But yeah, allowing the next sites to come, look, and understand big picture. They're not going to get the details. It takes time. But big picture of what we're trying to accomplish. And then really we're coming from a pretty antiquated system. So just the fact that you come in and you're not looking at that blue screen and you're looking at like a real web page, that you could use your mouse for, it gets them excited. So they might not know all the ins and outs, but it gives them something to look forward to. And then as our site number 1 continues to get better and fine tunes their craft, we'll get them out to the field to show them what's possible in their buildings. And again, pass on all the good stuff. because it really is. Hope that answers your question.
Right. So if there's one slide that you could take with you, and this is, you know, I'm not saying you can't take all of it with you, but this is the one slide I would put in my back pocket. Key tasks of flawless execution and risk avoidance. Vendor client RACI created. Talked about that. Subject matter expert team assigned. Design documents approved, building prepared, configurations aligned with the design. Work instructions, SOPs completed, test scripts and scenarios support the design. Relevant and ample data for testing. This, I can't come back and stress this enough. How do I get relevant data? You just can't, you know, you can create purchase orders and sales orders, say, yeah, okay, this is what, but how do I get a good cross section of my real everyday occurrences to get that data for testing? If it takes you a day to figure out how to do that, take 2 days and do it right. Integrations completed and signed off. Testing's completed and signed off. No open showstopper issues. We have a go live and cutover plan that was approved. Employee logons created and tested prior to training, maybe, you know, a couple days prior to training, make sure that's good. Contingency plan approved. And tested, I might add now, I'll put that in there too. Production server is ready and smoke tested. By smoke test, we're going live, we're at live data, but before I turn it over to operations, I want to receive a purchase order. I want to ship a sales order. I just want to see the system work in production with right data, this and that. Once that does, then we turn it over to operations. Go live support schedule is developed, escalation plan implemented. So those are really critical areas. So
Chris, I'm going to put you on the spot. Of all those lists, you have a top 2, top 3 gotchas that you put in your back pocket to never repeat again?
From this list in front, is that what we're, so
yes.
yeah, I don't know. I really want to stress, Dave's stressing the same thing. It's really hard to get proper test data. And it means proper test data means something different to me after this process as it did before. Just because you don't realize when you're in your business day to day how much variance there is, again, to the happy path. I can't stress that enough. Something as simple as, a date that might mean something special, or a thank you SKU. When you're thinking happy path, you might not think of that thank you SKU, or you want to put that in there, and that's something that the new system is going to have to take into consideration. So really maybe spending a little bit of time making sure that your test cases include those things, looking over not just in theory the scenarios, but maybe spending a day or two looking at real life orders, transfers, purchase orders, everything with a highlighter, and taking out and saying that's a little bit different than the one I just looked at, and pulling that all together. Testing a contingency plan is really good. Thank God we didn't really need it, but it was something that we thought of after the fact. Okay, that's a good takeaway for the next sites. And if I had to pick one other one here, I think that's pretty good, to be honest with you. We gotten very lucky. Dave said earlier, I'll just call this out as well. Dave talked about, not everything going great. Testing wise, your goal shouldn't be 100%, 99% when you're done testing, because chances are it's not going to work like that the first time. And if you get a 99% after you go through all your first scripts, go back and check your scripts and make some more stuff.
Yeah, you're missing something.
Right. So those would be my top 3.
Good.
Takeaways.
So, in summary, understanding the roles and responsibilities of the vendor and client is a critical step in the overall implementation plan. It will highlight what areas the client will need to secure additional resources. honest assessments of existing resources to determine if you have the experience, bandwidth, and talent to complete these client-side responsibilities. If you don't, if you think you can do it yourself, I just want to point out delays could be more costly in the long run than contracting this work out. Involve these additional resources early in the project. Get them in there. Anybody that's going to be part of the project, getting them in the design workshops so they hear what everybody's hearing is so helpful. Create a solid cross-functional team of SMEs to help design, implement, and a sound product. Lastly, major changes can be overwhelming to an organization. We didn't really touch on this a lot because it's really a separate arm. Developing a sound change management plan. If you're capable of doing that, great. If you're not, we can help with that too. I don't do that part of it, so I was more on the implementation, but the change management is a hand in hand with something as large as a WMS implementation.
Yeah, I think one key point on this slide is the honest assessment, right?
Yeah.
You have to really look at it and say, are these the right people? Are they ready? And it shouldn't be a voluntold kind of thing, right? So people want to be able to eagerly do it and do it their way. So Chris, Dave, thank you very, very much. If you go to the next slide, we really appreciate it. So this next slide kind of represents some activities that Alpine has done recently with customers like Raymour and Flanigan with implementation help. I'm happy to, talk to you. We've got some contact information on the next slide. Any open questions, Dave? They should have come in the chat box. I think most of them that got asked were asked. I filtered them in there, but were there any additional questions, Mr. Christine?
All right.
Sounds like no.
I thank everybody for their
No
time.
additional. That was good.
Okay. I thank everybody
Thanks,
for their
everyone.
time today. And this will be on our website on the recording and in the near future. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.